psychiatry. Mysterious, dark, feared. That's why the black box. Really a lot unknown about it. One of the most severe psychiatric illnesses is schizophrenia. And even for this severe illness that strikes the young, that involves 1 in 100 people in the general population, and involves changes in thinking and behavior and emotions, brain functions, right? They're not kidney functions or heart functions. Even for a severe illness like this, that affects individuals at all ages, and really their functioning, their basic functioning in terms of having relationships and being able to work, and so is a huge burden on families, even for this serious psychiatric illness. There's been a lot of mystery around it and a lot of fear of individuals with this condition. And when there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of mystery, there's often a lot of blame to go around too. So who was blamed first? Well, historically, it would have been the devil. Then it was witches. Women figure very largely in this, in terms of blame. Society at large, families, and especially mothers. Very powerful people, mothers. I mean, imagine inducing an illness like schizophrenia that causes delusions, people where they have beliefs that, for example, the CIA is following them or something like that, or they're hearing voices, then a mother could do that to their offspring. So a lot of blame because of the fear of the unknown in this condition, and a lot of avoidance too. Now, where does genetics figure in this? Interestingly, the history of psychiatry and of studying schizophrenia also kind of parallels the study of genetics. So what did we know first? Well, first we knew we could see chromosomes, so DNA packaged into chromosomes under the microscope. 60 years we've been able to see this. So the first thought is, okay, if schizophrenia might have genetic underpinnings, or there might be genetic causes of schizophrenia, are there chromosomal changes? So early in my career, we actually looked for chromosomal changes. I mean, it seems kind of funny now, but we did. And I actually found one for one patient. Actually, him and his uncle. It was quite extraordinary at the time. But that really wasn't panning out. Then, okay, what about the whole genome? So the whole genome is like the book of life, right? So made up of individual letters called base pairs. And there are normal changes in these letters, so in the genetic alphabet. And there are changes that cause disease, and there are changes that change risk for disease. So what about, was there any one of those 3 billion base pairs that was involved in schizophrenia? So we embarked upon, we collectively, researchers around the world, collectively embarked upon studies that were successful for other diseases, like here in Toronto, cystic fibrosis, finding the gene for CF, huge. Finding the gene for Huntington's disease with colleagues I was working with in New York at the time. So very exciting. How about for schizophrenia? We take large families, several members of the family affected with the illness. We can do the same thing. Nope, that didn't work. So the next thing that we learned about, and this is a huge advance in the field of genetics. So Watson and Crick found the genetic code, so these genetic letters, the genetic alphabet. A huge advance in the last several years, really the last couple of decades, has been that there can be structural changes in the human genome. So not just changes in the individual letters, but changes in the structure. So perhaps a whole paragraph of those letters missing, or a whole paragraph extra, as opposed to a whole chapter like the chromosomes. So for example, Down syndrome, or a whole chromosome 21 is extra in individuals with Down syndrome. And the other, I think, revelation for a lot of individuals in the general public and also for clinicians is that genetic changes can be inherited. So sometimes we kind of leap to, when we hear the word genetics, it's inherited that we leap to, but a lot of genetic changes are actually new to that family, new in that individual. So what about that? What about those kind of changes? And those structural changes can also be normal in our genome. They can cause disease, or they can cause disease risk. This is where the light starts to glimmer in schizophrenia. So now we know that 1 out of every 100 people with this greatly feared disease, very serious disease, has a structural genetic change on chromosome 22 called 22q11.2 deletion syndrome. So there's a piece missing, 3 million base pairs long usually, on chromosome 22 for 1 out of every 100 people, approximately, with schizophrenia. So what does that do? What does that do for the patient and for the family and for the clinicians treating that patient? It's been absolutely amazing to me. I never thought that I would see this in my career, that something that had been discovered genetically could actually be translated, and you could do a blood test for it, which is what you can do for this illness, for schizophrenia. What it does is it provides a concrete cause. You can actually see the results of the genetic test that's usually done. It changes genetic counseling. It changes the perception of the family, and especially for those mothers who thought, well, you know, maybe it was that one drink I had for New Year's Eve, or that one Valium tablet that I might have taken, and all the years that that person was around, all their adult years, they wondered, was that what caused this illness? It just takes that blame away from them and the stigma. And what we've found, moreover, in fact, this is work of one of my wonderful graduate students, is that the stigma of this illness can actually be reduced for people who don't have a 22q deletion form of this illness. Just to know that there's a possibility for other people that you could find a genetic cause, you can see a decrease in stigma for patients and families. And this is the work of my graduate student, Greg Costain. So absolutely wonderful work. And a wonderful change for patients and families. It changes things for clinicians too, because the management changes somewhat for these patients, because you know something more about them that you didn't know before, and you can change their anticipatory care. It changes their medical care as well. So, you know, in medicine, you find one thing, you look for others that are something similar. And guess what? You can find them. In other individuals with this illness, with schizophrenia, you can find other genetic changes on other chromosomes that involve pieces missing, deletions, or pieces extra, duplications. And some of those are probably more risk factors, or greatly increase the risk for schizophrenia, as opposed to being what we would consider truly causal, but they're very important for those families, and they change, again, they change the perception for the patients and the families. So a little bit more light shining on causation in this illness. What's even more important, perhaps, and has been a real revelation for the field, is that some of those genetic changes are the same changes that you find in individuals with autism, a completely different psychiatric illness. It's much more developmental in nature, definitely involves changes in thinking, behavior, and emotions, but in a different way than those in schizophrenia. So there are some that are similar, there's some that are different, and they're also in autism, which we don't have yet for schizophrenia, but we will, are single gene changes. Because what's different about these rather large structural genetic changes is they're often multigenic. That is, they involve or they overlap multiple different genes. And that's probably leading to some of the complexity in these conditions, particularly with these copy number variations or these structural genetic changes. So this slide, what this slide is doing, on the left-hand side, it's representing the kind of silos that we do research in. So most of us are studying a disease. So in clinical research, we're studying a disease, schizophrenia. Other people, neurologists mostly, epilepsy. Other people, mostly cardiologists, congenital cardiac defects. And people doing developmental studies of individuals with intellectual disability. Very interesting, because sometimes all of those silos lead to the same structural genetic change identification in individuals within those different cohorts of people with those conditions. When that happens, and this is again typical in the history of genetics, then you find, so you found all of the kind of the most severe forms of this genetic change in terms of expression. And then what you do, and this is kind of the rainbow going out on the other side, with the core expression being the most severe, then you find Other people perhaps in an individual family, if it happens to be an inherited or a transmitted change, and they don't have maybe the most severe manifestations of that genetic change. Then you find individuals where you can hardly find any change in expression at all. Maybe it's there on a molecular level, but you can't see it in terms of behavioral expression or certainly psychiatric expression. But you have to look for all of the different medical, physical expressions as well. So a pattern is starting to emerge for these genomic disorders, or these large structural genetic changes. Very, very exciting research. Back to schizophrenia. So what have we got now? We've got actual molecular subtypes of schizophrenia. Again, I thought we would never ever get to that in my career. It's so exciting and so important. And what that means is that we have a chink in the armor. We have a way of looking for the basic brain mechanisms that are involved, the basic genetic mechanisms that are involved, and the basic brain mechanisms that are involved. And we have the capability then of having models. We can make a 22q11.2 deletion equivalent in a mouse, in a zebrafish, in another animal model. Amazing. Much easier to study those animal models than it is to study humans, especially the brain, which is rather inaccessible for study, for direct study at least, during life. So, and it also means that we are going to be able to look at the genes within those regions that are either deleted, missing, or duplicated, extra, for what genes within those regions might be important and what networks those might lead us to. So there's lots still to be discovered, and once you find one, you can find others, and there's hope for finding more. So what this brings schizophrenia, just being a model for all of the other major psychiatric conditions, is the hope that we will be, and we are doing this, in our lifetime, that means in your lifetime. There's a career ahead of you, though, to find and identify these functional genetic networks, because especially for multiple gene disorders in these complex illnesses, common complex illnesses like schizophrenia or Parkinson's disease or congenital cardiac defects, is that you can put the patterns together, and there are many genes, many variants of many genes that are interacting. And that's really the new frontier for all of you. More gene discovery, more variant discovery, and more putting together of the networks so that we can understand the basic brain mechanisms for psychiatric illness. And what that's going to do for patients and families and clinicians as well is provide hope and shine light on the shadows of stigma for psychiatric illness and the mysteries of that black box. Thank you.